Hello and welcome to another knitting pod. I'm Lena and I'm coming to you from Boulder, Colorado. This is a podcast where we chat about knitting and fiber and books and life and all sorts of other things. If that sounds good to you, let's jump right into it. I'm really glad you're here. If this is your first time, welcome. I hope you find something that piques your interest here. Anyway, let's get right into it. So it is late September. I don't know where the time has gone, you guys, but here we are. It is officially fall. And what could be more ironic than losing your knitting mojo right when fall is upon us? It's just, I find myself in this position, you guys. I seem to be in a bit of a knitting rut, and I blame Stephen West. I blame Stephen West. This is not something you hear often from me. If you're new here, there's nobody I love more than Stephen West. Don't tell my children. But I really squarely put this blame on his shoulders because the Mystery Knit Along for 2023 starts October 5th. That is about 2 weeks from today for me. And I have found myself just in a holding pattern with regards to my knitting until the MCAL starts. And I'm not loving life right now. I've got tons of things I should be working on. And my intention from the time he announced the MCAL for this year was to really not cast anything else on and just make good progress on the projects I have on the needles, because once that MCAL starts, I'm going to jump wholeheartedly into the MCAL. And I think a couple of things have conspired to land me in this situation. Number one, the two main projects I'm working on are both really, really simple. One is the Half and Half Triangles wrap by Pearl Soho. I have talked about this so much, so I'm not going to talk about it much here, I promise. I'm working on that. And then the Hand Stolm sweater for my husband by Petite Knit. These are both very straightforward patterns. The sweater is stockinette. The shawl is garter. These are great background knitting projects for me usually, but they are just, it's really hard for me to just stay focused on them when I really want to cast something else on. I mean, I could rattle off so many things that I would have cast on in the last month if it weren't for the MCAL, but I've told you guys this before. This year, my goal is to finish the MCAL in this calendar year of 2023, and that choice means holding off on a couple of other cast-ons that I would have liked to, I would like on my needles right now, but what are you gonna do? I have not been knitting for long. For those of you who are new here, I think I've been knitting for about 2.5, 3 years. And I do not think I have ever been able to say I've lost my knitting mojo. And maybe that's not even what's happening now, because I think if I could just cast something on right now, my mojo would be totally on point, but because I'm not, it's off. So anyway, I have a couple things to share with you, but I did find that finally yesterday, when I had a little time to myself, which is hard to come by these days, I picked up this cabled sweater that I've been working on, the Clarette sweater by Thea Coleman. And this is my second sleeve. So yesterday was the first time this week that I felt like I found joy in my knitting. I found that feeling that I get from knitting that is why I'm in love with knitting, which is a calm presence and, how to put this, like a calm but alert present feeling that I get from knitting. Like sometimes it's challenging, sometimes it's calm, and I'm just in the rhythm of it. But whenever I'm in that knitting feeling, it's the best. And when you lose that, it's so weird. Like my life has felt really weird this week, you guys. Like literally my life has felt off because I haven't had knitting to turn to that just feels really comforting and wonderful and not just monotonous and rote and repetitive and just a slog. And I feel like it breaks my heart to say that sweater feels like a slog right now. I'll talk more about that in a second. But yesterday I had an hour and I got back into this and it felt so good to feel the sparkle of knitting again. I think the reason I think what you're thinking is, if you have this sweater, why have you lost the sparkle? And the reason is, if you can believe it, like if you've watched the episodes I talked about casting this on, I had never knit anything this complicated with cables. And I was so intimidated, and it took so much focus to kind of get to a good place with this sweater. And now, I've completed this first sleeve. So this was the second sleeve that I'm working on. And it is so, I feel so practiced at this now that it's boring. I mean, if you can imagine, I can't believe I'm saying this, but this at this point is a 5-row repeat. So you go from here, the cuff is like, I think this is 15 rows. And then this whole thing is a 5-row repeat. And even though you have to kind of pay attention, it just, at this point, sleeve 2 feels very repetitive and boring. And I don't know. Yesterday, I was thankful that I think I've put it aside for long enough that it felt fun again to knit. So I'm really grateful for that, because this yarn has already wanted to be something else, and I've ripped it out once. And I love and want this sweater, and I do not want to rip it out. So I'm happy that I felt excited to pick this up again. Anyway, I've talked about this project a ton. Also, if you want to hear more about it, you can go back if you've missed some previous episodes. The one thing I will say about the hand sewn sweater, I've made a ton of progress on it, not because I'm super inspired, as you now know, but because I really want it done. And on Saturday, it was Saturday, I was knitting it outside on the patio, and my husband walked out, and I was like, I've finally gotten enough of the body. Let me put it on some barber cords and try it. I want you to try it on. And he tried it on, you guys, and the saving grace, it fit so beautifully, and it was such a joy to see it on him, even though it's like, he was laughing. He's like, it's a sleeveless crop top. And it totally was at that moment. But now it has gotten a lot longer, and I'm just chugging through it because I'm not knitting anything else, and I'm always kind of on the go right now. So it's a great mindless thing to put in my bag. But I was just thrilled to see how beautifully it fit him. I mean, perfect. He wanted it to be more fitted and not have a ton of ease. So it was he's a very tall person, a tall, slender person. So it was very weird when I measured everything, and I realized I measured him, and I measured his favorite shirt, and which is this long sleeve waffle tee by Vuori. And the circumference of the chest was 41 inches. And that just felt, that corresponded to a small in the hand sewn sweater. And to cast on a small size sweater for someone who's 6'3" felt very risky. It felt like there's just no way, like, I'm going to end up regretting the day, because he's never bought a small anything. Like, he's always a large, but this sweater is designed to be like 8 to 10 inches of positive ease, and he wanted like no positive ease. So I cast on a small. It felt very risky, but here we are. It fits well. The raglans and the shoulder, it just looked so perfect that it lit a bit of a fire under me to keep going. So all is good. I just have to keep on going. If this were, like I said, a background project to the MCAL, I'd be in great shape. I would be loving this because I would be picking this up when I needed a break. But right now it's kind of like the only thing I have to pick up because I can't take the cable sweater on out into the world because I'm not still, I have to keep track of what row I'm on, and like you have to increase every 14 rows. So there's just a lot to keep track of, and I like to have my written notes to refer to, and I'm not going to take that stuff out into the world. So this has been my on-the-go project, and I will not be sad when this is over. Okay, that's it. I will say one more thing. This is, told you guys a million times, this is Double Sunday by Sandnes Garn. It's a non-superwash yarn, and one thing I'm really loving about this, because they are 50-gram balls, and I have like a gazillion skeins because it's a big sweater, but to be able to spit splice, I don't know, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept of spit splicing. Basically, you're felting together the end of one skein and the beginning of another skein. And my new interest in superwash has led to this fabulous joy of spit splicing because you don't have to weave in ends, and it's just this beautifully smooth transition from one skein to the other. And I really am enjoying that. So if you're not familiar, it's called that just because you're supposed to like spit into your hand and then felt the two ends together. You don't have to do that, but that is, you know, why it's called that. So that's that. You know, and the lesson sort of, if in the past I would have lost my knitting mojo, I would have just found something new to cast on, right? But it was kind of nice to have to stay with the discomfort almost of not being able to just solve my emotional issue with knitting by casting on something new, because I had to stick with everything I'm knitting right now and just kind of dig a little deeper. And when I dug a little deeper, I found the joy again with this. And it would have been easy to just think, oh, I'm not enjoying this. And I'm glad I am, because like I said, I really want this sweater. Okay. I feel very disorganized mentally today. It's been a weird week. Okay. So all that being said, I think my lack of knitting mojo this week is also compounded by this fact. And to convey this fact, I'm gonna have to tell you the background. I was just scrolling Instagram. I have found I'm not on Instagram very much lately. I just have not had, I feel like I've been kind of running around a lot and not been able to be on there a lot to get in knitting inspiration. But I saw a post by Katrin Seeberger. Katrin, I don't know how to say that name, but she is the designer of the Heirloom Quilt Cardigan, and I think it was published this summer, and I've seen it floating around. I've always thought it was beautiful, but this was a video rather than a photograph. And I've told you guys before, I have found that a video conveys a lot more about what a garment actually looks like than a photograph, and in person conveys substantially more than that. But since we can't see each other all the time, sometimes it's just great to be able to see a video. She had posted a video on Instagram of her styling the Heirloom Quilt Cardigan in 4 different ways for fall or something like that. And I was just completely smitten. I thought it was so freaking cool. I loved it. I thought it was just perfectly, it fit my style just so perfectly. I could see myself wearing it so much. Number one, I thought it was such a unique piece. And number two, you guys know, if you've been with me, I like very oversized things in like terms of sweaters and cardigans. I just really don't like really tight things. And this had this cool oversized look. And to boot, I thought because the heirloom cardigan is made by making a bunch of squares and then piecing them together into the cardigan. Then you pick up for the sleeves, I think, and knit the sleeves and the ribbing. Fabulous. Sorry, somebody's calling me, so I'm going to just decline that. I lost my train of thought. Okay, so what I was thinking was this is the perfect in-between project between now and the MCAL, because I won't feel bad about having a project languishing if it's blocks, because if you've got just 5 blocks completed or whatever, however many number of blocks completed, and then you set it aside, it doesn't have needles attached to it. There's not yarn just lying around. Like, I don't know, in my mind, it just felt like knitting socks or something. Like you can find a nice stopping point and then move on. Do you know what I mean? So I shared this with my friend Jessica, and she was just as smitten. She was like, oh my gosh, she thought it was the coolest garment she's seen in a minute. So she was like, I'm totally in. So I was like, yay, perfect. It's just meant to be. So we were hiking that day, and I came home and I bought the pattern, and it's DK weight, but she suggests using stash yarn by holding fingering weight yarn double. And I definitely already had all this yarn in mind and a color palette, and everything was just coming together in my mind. I was like, yes, this is going to be perfect. So I cast it on. I cast a square on. And I loved it too, because you don't even have to really gauge swatch, because you're making a square. You can just practice a square and gauge swatch that way. Y'all, it is color work flat. And I was like, what's the big deal? Color work round, color work flat, whatever. I've got this. Totally fine. Not even remotely concerned about this. Womp, womp, y'all. It was so much more challenging than I ever could have dreamt. I think I cast on and ripped it out 3 times. And every time I thought I was getting the hang of it, I'd come back to it later, and I felt like I was starting at square one, no pun intended. Nope. Oh my gosh. Sorry. Gonna take a sip of water. I'm sorry if I'm gulping in your ear. It's so disgusting. it was so disappointing. I couldn't have dreamt that purling color work, like on the wrong side, would be very challenging. But I think the most challenging thing was catching the floats on both sides. I was really struggling, and I've done color work before and I've never struggled like that. And I think it's because even though there is a main color and then a contrasting color, I'm going to put pictures so you can visualize what I'm describing. You're having to catch the floats. You're having to catch the floats both, like the main color catching the contrast color and vice versa. So your yarn just keeps getting twisted. It's super hard to keep them separate and consistent in terms of like color dominance, and then amplify that by trying to purl. And so normally when I do color work, I hold both yarns in my left hand and I just pick continental style which color. And I found that to be just brilliant. But purling that is just a whole different story. And then catching the floats, it was like killing my joy all week. Every time I'm like, okay, I got this. Like, jazz myself up to conquer it this time. It was just a failure through and through every time. I finally had to just give up. And like, that's thankfully, Jessica, not thankfully, I'm not wishing difficulties upon her. She's a much, much, much more experienced knitter than I, and she was having all sorts of trouble too. Except she's much grittier than me, apparently, because she just kept persevering, and she says she thinks she's figured it out. So we're going to get together next week. She's out of town this weekend, but we're going to get together next week and try to figure it out. But oh my gosh, it was such a disappointment to feel like you had the perfect project in terms of it's fitting this moment in my life, and I want this, like, the FO so bad, and then having just such bad luck executing it. I have to say, I was thinking about this today. I don't think I've had a single knitting endeavor that has been an epic fail. Like, everything I've tried to do since I began my knitting journey, I found a way to succeed. Whether it's like lace or cables or color work, this is the first time I felt like this is just beyond my skill level or willpower level. I don't know what it is. And Savannah Solivy is her Instagram handle. She has a podcast also. I messaged her on Instagram because I remembered that she had cast this on and was working on it. And she did say it was a challenge at the beginning, and she was very sweet and sent me a video of her knitting it. It's just, so she was holding yarn in both hands. It's tricky, man. If you have knit it, please let me know. Please share any tips if you've tried to cast it on and haven't. I really think the designer would be well served inserting videos to accompany her written pattern, because there's a lot to be desired in terms of support in that pattern. It just appears so easy on the surface. And then I think it doesn't look complicated, right? And then you can look at like a Stephen West MCAL or something, and you can be so intimidated. But he is such a great teacher and gives so many video tutorials that I think that's probably why I thought I would be able to execute this, but I haven't been able to. Maybe I'm just spoiled and I haven't had to struggle on my own. I've like been able to use, you know, the resources that are on YouTube. But with this, I haven't been able to find any helpful resources that translate exactly. Like Suzanne Bryan has a couple of videos on knitting color work flat, but they were helpful to some extent, but I don't know. Jessica and I were talking about how they should have a class for this cardigan at a yarn shop. Like, we have so many yarn shops. I think it would be amazing if one of them conquered it and had a class, because I would pay for that. It's been a really frustrating thing that has compounded my knitting woes this week. And I've just felt like I've been in such a funk without knitting as my emotional support. That's just the truest thing. I guess this week really brought home how much I rely upon knitting for like emotional stability, because I felt totally off this week. Anyway, I've been back to teaching my fitness and yoga classes, and that's definitely been a lifesaver, because that has kind of filled in the gap and allowed me to feel creative and fulfilled and not, you know, be so out with knitting. But anyway, you can't have everything all the time, I think. Everything isn't going to be firing at 100% at all the time. So it's always good to have other parts of your life that bring you joy, because if you rely on just one thing, whether that's knitting or something else, when that's off, you're going to feel super weird. So it's good to have several balls in the air. Anyway, okay. sadly, that is literally all the knitting content I have because of what's been going on. But that's okay. Not every week is going to be the same. I was tempted to not even tape this week, but I thought that's not fair because I do have a lot going on. It's just maybe it's not positive. And I did forget real quick. Let me show you this basket of yarn that I thought this color palette would be just so beautiful for this heirloom quilt cardigan. I have a ton of linen quill that I was gonna hold double, and as I was making my first square, I realized it's hard enough to have to color work flat. And then what was compounding it was then having to work each color with yarn held double. It was just making it so much worse. So then I started making my practice square with actual DK weight yarn, so I wasn't juggling so much yarn. But I feel like linen quill held double is just absolutely perfect for this project. So I think this is dark iris. I can't remember, but this fresh nutmeg, dark denim, I think that's what this is called. And this is whatever that blue, I always forget. I thought this would make just such a cool kind of retro palette. And then to make it even better, I have 2.5 skeins of this left over from my Ginny cardigan that I knit last year by Andrea Mowry. And talk about a mismatch between this yarn and the Ginny cardigan are a total mismatch. This yarn, it's Hedgehog Fibers Tweedy in their original gray. I don't even think it has a name, a colorway. Now she has this in many colors. It's similar, La Bien-Aimée came out with a similar yarn after this called Confetti. It's a recycled yarn, so you get these funky tweedy bits. And when I saw this, I absolutely fell in love because I just loved this idea of recycled bits of yarn spun into another yarn. So this is 50% Falkland merino wool, 37.5% recycled wool, and 12.5% thread waste. Why is it a mismatch? Because this is a very itchy fiber. I cannot imagine that this is superwash. I'm sure it's not. It doesn't say, but usually Hedgehog Fibers is superwash. This is the itchiest fiber I have ever worked with. I think I've touched the Confetti by La Bien-Aimée and it felt softer, but I don't know because I think it's very different when something is washed and blocked and dried and all that. Things can lose their itchiness. No can do, y'all. This is itchy, itchy, itchy. And the Ginny cardigan is very tight and it's got like super fitted arms, what I call sausage casing arms, which is like a second skin. I mean, I'm sure you could knit it bigger, but the look is like this cute belted cardigan. And I was just so excited about it. And then so disappointed that every time I put it on, I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I'm wearing a hair shirt. So anyway, and of course, I think I've talked about this before, Andrea Mowry always overestimates how much yarn you use, which I think is great because it's better than underestimating. I think she's building in, you know, swatching and blah, 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 but the result was just a ton of leftover yarn that I don't love. Long story short, I was going to use this in this project because it's such an oversized piece and it's an open cardigan. So I know I'm going to wear something under it. So I don't think it's going to be really tight to my skin. And I don't think it'll matter that it's a little itchier. And I think this would just be so pretty as a background with all these other colors. And I think it'll be nice not to have to hold all the fingering weight double. So I'd hold one strand of this, and even if the contrast color or the other color is held double, it'll be less fiddly, if you know what I mean. Because I love the look of this yarn, but oh my gosh, you guys, itchy. And one of you, Michelle, was saying, yes, she has this, and she was disappointed that it was so itchy. So it's not just me. That is definitely an issue. So if you are drawn to that yarn, it's beautiful, but proceed with caution. Okay, that is officially all the knitting content I have for you. But I do have other content, especially books and TV shows. So if you watched my previous few episodes, you know I was listening to Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, and oh my goodness, you guys, I finally finished it last weekend. Not finally. I mean, I zipped through that book because it was just so good. I listened to all my books on Libro FM. If you didn't know that, I think Libro FM is just the best resource for audiobooks, because every time you buy an audiobook, you're supporting an independent bookstore rather than buying off Audible. I know some of you use Libby, Public Library, which is awesome. My problem with that is just, if I want to read a book, I want to read it now, and I don't want to wait because I'm impatient. So I use Libro FM. And so anyway, Demon Copperhead was just spectacular through and through. If you haven't read it, I couldn't recommend it more. It was just, it's everything that makes reading magical. It's just beautifully written. The voice is so authentic. It opens your eyes to a world that might not be yours. It builds just like connection between you and a whole different world. You know what I mean? And to boot, I think it's possibly my favorite ending of any book I've ever read. I absolutely loved the ending. It was both shocking to me and absolutely self-evident at the same time. How that happens, I don't know, but I think that speaks to the brilliance of Barbara Kingsolver. She's just a master. I mean, an absolute master. I loved the ending of that book so dang much. I'm not going to say anything about it because I don't want to ruin anything for you if you're reading it or if you plan to read it. But 5 stars out of 5, really 10 stars out of 5 for me. I mean, it's so funny. I think I was raving about Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese a couple weeks ago to you guys. And a more absolutely polar opposite reading experience I cannot imagine than Covenant of Water versus Demon Copperhead. And yet, both just such transporting and fulfilling novels. They're just both, it's an embarrassment of riches. I mean, we are just so lucky as readers to have so many genius authors out there sharing their work. So both of those books are absolutely highly recommended for me. And there is just nothing harder than picking a book after you're done with a book that you really loved. And I think the end of Demon Copperhead coincided with this little knitting funk, and it's left me feeling just at sea. Like, I feel like I lost my book and I don't have a project I'm loving right now. It's just, oh, it's not good. So I started reading, hair is driving me crazy. There's like a strand of hair that keeps being pulled into my mouth. That is weird and gross, but full disclosure. What is it? I was just saying, oh, okay. So on Sunday, I was just like scouring every resource I could find for a book that would live up to Demon Copperhead. Like, of course I could have read another Barbara Kingsolver book because she's got a fabulous back catalog. And then, but nothing was like pulling me. And I finally settled on, well, I'll tell you a couple others that I was sort of toying between. Ann Patchett has released a new book called Tom Lake. That felt, I was kind of on the fence. I couldn't decide. I mean, it's narrated by Meryl Streep, so, but it was just, I don't know. I wasn't feeling super drawn to that. And then the other author I really would love to know if any of you have read is James McBride, whose new book is called The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. And he's written several novels, one of which was Deacon King Kong, which got phenomenal reviews and has won lots of awards. And the narrator of both of those books is the same person and has the best voice. And if you're an audiobook enthusiast, you know, like, who's narrating the book is it makes or breaks the book. Like, it could be the best book in the world narrated by the wrong person. You're like scratching your, you know, it's like nails on a chalkboard. You're just clawing your hair out because it's just grating. You know what I mean? And at first I thought Demon Copperhead was going to have that problem because the voice is so unique. But it ends up being great. I think it's very authentic to the voice of the character. But anyway, James McBride, this narrator, I don't know what his name is. It's not James McBride. I know that. It's phenomenal. His voice is so good. So maybe I will end up getting one of those. What I ended up getting was Rebecca Mackay's I Have Some Questions for You, because I heard Ann Patchett talking about it on an interview she did with the New York Times Book Review podcast. I downloaded it and listened to probably 4 hours of it, maybe a little less. And I feel like it's categorized as a mystery, which I enjoy once in a while as a palate cleanser. It did not click with me at all. I've heard a lot of books narrated by that narrator, and she narrates everything the same way. Like, she has a very specific intonation, and it just feels a little, I don't know. It doesn't feel like she narrates each book uniquely for its voice. It feels like she just kind of brings the same thing to each book, and it wasn't clicking. The story didn't click with me. The voice of the character didn't click. The narrator didn't click. I was just like kind of listening to it just to listen to it. And then it just occurred to me, like, let me just email Libro FM. I buy so many books from them and recommend them to everyone I know. So I was like, listen, I just emailed the customer service. I thought I was going to like this book. I didn't. Can I just exchange it for a different book? And they responded immediately and were like, absolutely no problem. They exchanged it and put a credit back into my account, which I was so grateful for, because I feel guilty when I don't finish a book. It feels wasteful, but life is too short to read something you don't like really love, or at least baseline like. And this one was just not, it wasn't working. So that is not to say, if you loved that book, because I know it was very popular this summer, if you loved it, I'm happy for you. It's just, reading is so personal, what clicks with one person. And also I think it's timing, right? Like, what you're ready to receive in one moment, it's hard to receive in another. I think coming off of Demon Copperhead, that's just a tough act to follow. That's all. So right now, my considerations are something by James McBride. And I was listening to the New York Times book podcast today before this, and they were interviewing Zadie Smith about her new book, The Fraud. And Zadie Smith is one of those people that I am massively intimidated by. She is so intimidating intellectually to me. She's so much smarter than I could ever be on any planet that like I'm almost scared to read her books. I read her books a long time ago, many of them when I was very young. And maybe that's why I'm intimidated, because I was just young and dumb and wasn't ready to receive the full scope of her books. And I think if I read them now, I'd probably receive them much better. But anytime I see Zadie Smith, I'm like, oh, she's too smart for me. So anyway, the interview was so good, and I love her voice also. And I realized she's narrating the audiobook, and then I was kind of like, I feel like I kind of might have to. So I might read that. And if you've seen the cover, it's a really appealing cover for anybody who loves color. It's just a really fun, cool cover art for The Fraud by Zadie Smith. So those are the books I'm considering. I might just take a break and like listen to a podcast or something if I have a podcast in my queue that I might fall into. I'm kind of in a podcast drought also, which is frustrating, but anyway, I'll figure it out. It will all click and come together on October 5th when Stephen West finally releases this freaking MCAL. Stephen West, you are making my life difficult right now. Normally, he makes my life extra rainbow sparkly, but this last few weeks, we're in a fight, he and I. We're not talking to each other. We have a temporary breakup. That's okay. We'll come back together, but right now, we're broken up. Okay. I'm looking at my notes to see what else. Oh, I do have to tell you guys, the other thing that's like saved my life this last couple of weeks is a TV show. I don't talk about TV shows unless they are truly mind-blowing. And this falls in the category of like top 10 TV shows of all time for me. And that is White Lotus on HBO Max, whatever you want to call it. Or just Max. I think it's just Max now. But there are 2 seasons of this show out. It is so good, okay? It is so good. It is as complex and like the character development and stories and plot line are as complex as a really good novel. So it's just addicting. I have literally not been getting enough sleep because of this show, which drives me crazy because it just takes such a toll. I'm someone who needs my sleep. I'm like a toddler. And between my kids' insane schedules of having stuff way too late and then getting home and having to watch this show I'm addicted to, I'm not getting enough sleep. But we finished it last night, my husband and I, and we both equally loved it. Basically, the White Lotus is a hotel chain, and both seasons, there's only been 2 seasons, unfortunately. I could watch it for 80 seasons. There's only been 2 seasons, but they're basically, the first one is at a hotel property in Hawaii, and the other one is at a hotel property, this one in Italy, Sicily, somewhere in Italy. I think Sicily is right. Anyway, it is fantastic. There's only one character that is in both seasons, and I don't want to ruin anything for you, and I will give you a disclaimer. It is definitely a HBO adult content series. It's not like let me watch this with my teenager. I don't suggest that, especially for season 2. But if you enjoy a good story, you are in for a treat because it is really good. I highly recommend. So that is that has been my saving grace this last couple of weeks. Last thing, as usual, is the climate tip of the week. And this one comes from Julia from Switzerland. And I loved this one. And it's such an easy tweak to life that is really impactful. I think we all know that food waste is just an annoying, inevitable, really bad part of life. Like you cook, you have leftovers, you put them in the refrigerator, and it's just kind of a black hole. And her suggestion was have a specific shelf in your refrigerator for leftovers, and all leftover containers go on that shelf. So when you are trying to figure out what to eat, or, oh my God, do I have anything? You know that that shelf is housing everything that's already prepared and needs to be eaten. And in that way, really reducing food waste, because it's such a bummer when we go through the effort of either cooking something or even getting takeout or something, and then realizing it's gotten stuck in the back of the fridge. And when you discover it, it's disgusting and moldy and you have to deal with it. And you wasted money and resources and time cooking that thing or buying that thing and not eating it. And it becomes wasteful and it goes into a landfill, and that is a huge bummer. So just kind of corralling your refrigerator a little better. I found that to be massively helpful. A couple of months ago, our main refrigerator broke, which was a huge bummer because refrigerators are expensive, and we had to replace it. And there's nothing more glorious than having like a brand new refrigerator with no disgusting, moldy, old food and sauce and ketchup. And you know how it is. Once you've lived in a place for a certain amount of time, your refrigerator just becomes kind of like a sad place. Unless you're one of those incredible, like Marie Kondo folks that have everything perfectly organized. I wish. That is not me, unfortunately. But for a while, my refrigerator was looking like that, and I was organizing it, like really trying to have like, you know, all my fruits and vegetables organized and my carbs and my cheeses and blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of gotten a little bit sloppier. But I loved this tip of keeping your leftovers in one shelf because it's just helpful in keeping your refrigerator organized and wasting less food. Okay, y'all. My throat is very tired because I've taught a lot this week and I have screamed loudly a lot this week for that reason, and it's just tired. So I'm going to sign off now. Thank you for still listening to me this week, even though I don't feel like it was the most sparkly knitting podcast I've ever put out. But you know what? Not every week is the same. So here we are, being honest, sharing the realities of knitting. And hopefully by next week, Stephen West and I will have repaired our relationship, and I will report back. But in the meanwhile, I hope your knitting mojo is intact and as sparkly as ever. And if you do have any despair, send it my way. I'm going to keep trying on that square, and let's see if I can, I don't know, Jessica and I can salvage something from that pattern. But anyway, I will report back. But for now, goodbye, and I hope you have a lovely weekend. See you next time.